We're studying here tonight Parashat Pekudei. It is the last parsha in the book of Shmos, and it ends off with the cloud, some cloud of glory covering the tabernacle, covering the Mishkan, symbolizing the idea that the Shekhinah, the presence of God, or the ability that was given to us to sense the presence of the Almighty, is what culminates this book and this very significant structure. Now, we have to realize that when we read about a Mishkan that is finalized and operational, and they sense the presence of the Creator in that structure, this is so fundamental for our identity, because we survive as a community when we have such a structure operating. And in the past, and God willing in the future, that structure lives on with a temple, with a Beis HaMikdash. When we don't have a Bet HaMikdash, we have the Mikdash Me'at. We have our sanctuaries, we have our synagogues, we have our organizations that bring us together. So obviously a very significant moment for the people of Israel, the operational structure that brings us together. And, Nachmanides points out that we start off this book, the book of Shmos, as individuals that have lost great figures, the patriarchs, Yaakov, the tribes of Israel. And suddenly we're this large nation with nothing that gives us the ability of bringing the presence of God down into this world. In other words, when Avraham Avinu was alive, when Yitzchak was alive, when Yaakov was alive, they lived a life connected to the higher being, and they served as a temple. When you have a large nation, you need something to centralize them, to bring them together, and then bring down the presence of the Creator. That is achieved in this week's Parsha, Parashat Pekudei. And what we're going to try to figure out is the name chosen for the portion, the section, that really describes finally this great moment. We've been waiting, right? We've been waiting that things come together. We sense the presence of the Creator. And those last verses in Parashat Pekudei, that it talks about the cloud of Hashem, right? Would be with them continuously. Le'einei kol Yisrael, before the eyes of all of the house of Israel. So this is something that we sense the presence of God. And by the way, that's really the purpose of creation, right? We Torah Jews believe that we live in a magnificent world, and the Creator of the world wants us to appreciate Him, to know Him, to relate to Him. And when such a structure is operating the way it should, humanity, the people of Israel and humanity, recognize the Creator. So this is a very significant parsha for our journey throughout history. And what we're going to try to understand tonight is the unique name that was given to this parsha, not a coincidence. It's a very unique name. We have a special opportunity this year, being that we read Parashat Pekudei separate from Parashat Vayakel. Pekudei. What does Pekudei have to do? What is the meaning of the word? So it's lifkot, to count, or reckonings and counting, accounting, right? Jews were accountants and they used their accountants then. But why specifically is that word so crucial for a parsha that brings it all together, not just this specific operation, but the journey of the people of Israel? What's its significance? So I believe to appreciate this message from the one word, we're going to have to go ahead and address a bigger issue. You know, the world now is in a crisis. It's a crisis. It's not something to minimize. There's tremendous suffering taking place in the Ukraine. Tremendous suffering, brutality. And it boils down, unfortunately, it appears, to one person. And the person we're talking about is the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. I'm sure I'm not the only one that's uncomfortable with any comparison between Putin and Hitler. Not acceptable as a Jew, simply not acceptable. No one should be compared to Hitler. Even, yes, there's brutality, and yes, this is a dictator, but please, it's unfair, it's unright, and as Jews, we have to stand up and say, you know what, study a little bit of history before such a comparison. That's number one. But a lot of people have been struggling with understanding this individual. Now, before we go ahead and talk a little bit about the actions of one person, as Torah Jews, we know that we believe in a higher being. We believe there's a hidden hand of a creator. We believe in prayer when there are times of difficulty. We believe in self-improvement. These are things that are fundamental, right? We are entering into the month of Adar, and we remember the words of Lech Knos et Kol HaYudim, bring the Jewish people together. If you bring the Jewish people together, you have the tools to deal with the crisis. So we have to remember it from a Jewish perspective. At the same time, it is natural for us as humans to try to analyze the actions of a person that seem to be irrational, right? Because yes, you might expand your beautiful, tremendous empire, and Russia might take over a country that they see as an integral part of their Russian empire, because after all, Russia originated in that region. But at the same time, to not understand the suffering of your people and what your economy is being punished, and you personally are being punished, it appears to be irrational. And this is something that you hear a lot in the news. What's happening with Putin, right? Is he turning into a different person, right? You hear experts south of the border that are saying that this is not the same Vladimir Putin of 7-8 years ago. Something changed. And Judaism actually addresses the fact that all human problems are traceable to 3 attributes. These 3 attributes, if they are not addressed by a human being, they just become worse, and they grow within a person to such an extent that it could become out of control. Now, what 3 negative attributes are we talking about? Kina, ta'ava, kavod, right? Jealousy, right? You're a little bit jealous of a person. So Torah tells you you're supposed to speak to yourself, talk to yourself. Remind yourself that, you know what, our existence in this world is not forever. Those things that were given to you for a reason. If someone else has it, there's a reason they have it. Don't dream to be someone else. If on the other hand, you don't talk to yourself, and that's not a message transmitted to self, kina could grow, jealousy could grow. And it could get out of control and destroy the person. Jealousy can destroy a person. A person who has, but sees the neighbor has more, and then decides to go ahead and get involved in risky industries because they have a dream to expand and have as much as their neighbor, and then they land up with nothing. They could lose it all. Kina, the jealousy. The rabbis tell us in Pirkei Avot, Motzi et ha'adam min ha'olam. It can just remove you from the world. Obviously, a spiritual world, but even the physical one. The other one is ta'ava, is desire. There are natural desires that we have that, when channeled correctly, are wonderful. HaKadosh Baruch Hu put them in the system for a reason. But when they're out of control and a person just gives in to such temptations, they could grow and destroy a person. That's ta'ava. The third one is kavod, honor, recognition. And when a person has that struggle with kavod, he's not recognized, he's not honored enough. Not enough people bow to him or respect his opinion. And he feels that he is the greatest gift to humanity. And he has, in some cases, power. In other words, the kavod that he has, the fact that he is honored, is the byproduct of the fact that he is a person in position of power, right? The head of a church, the head of a synagogue, the head of a country, whatever it is. And if they feel they're not getting the proper kavod, they'll do anything to get more. And in many cases, they lose all their kavod because they're trying to get more. They're not going to be respected anymore because that ego is just growing and growing, and it destroys the person. And this is a question that, to really understand kavod, we have to understand also, how does Judaism view the proper attitude we're supposed to have towards rulers and people in power? In other words, I was once honored at a bris, and I was a sandik by a bris milah to hold the baby during that very significant moment. And it was a Sephardi family. And after the bris, there was suddenly this long line that formed of people that wanted brachos from the person who just held the baby during the bris milah. Now, I wasn't extremely familiar with that tradition that suddenly, if you held the baby and you were a sandik, that you give out brachos. So perhaps for the first bracha or two, I gave a bracha with some level of discomfort, not feeling worthy. But then when I realized that this is the norm and this is the tradition and this is the custom, I started getting the hang of it, and I perhaps was a little bit more relaxed with my brachos that I was giving. And as it moved on, I started feeling good about myself. I felt I have this power. I have power now. I could give blessings. And I realized that perhaps that could be that danger of honor, when a leader only gets respect, and his word is viewed as the word of God or the word of authority, depends what kind of leader we're dealing with. They start feeling good about themselves. And like any human desire, they want more of it. So if I'm an authority and I have 99% of the people listening to every single word I have to say, and my word is in order and a decree, I'm not going to be satisfied after time with the 99%. I'm going to want 100%, right? So we all agree that there's some level of danger when authority is given powers that's unchecked. No checks and balances, but rather all the power is given to them. Now, on the other hand, when authority is going to be questioned on every single move they make, anything they do, right? There's going to be cynicism and criticism. Reality is you're going to have a weaker leader. And at times when decisions need to be made, right? And when the leader, the ruler, needs to go ahead and take a position and perhaps can share all the details, right? I remember once that here at Bnei Torah, going back some years ago, I was raising funds for a specific cause. And I couldn't spell out the details, what it was for. So obviously the vast majority, and there were specific people that were extremely supportive and got the word out that if I got up, and I usually don't, and ask for funds for someone that needs it, and it was a pikuach nefesh, that the vast majority were supportive. Obviously, right, there were those that were critical and claimed that it's not possible, right? That what I claim that, obviously this is something, the rabbi is leaving out something. So there is a need, we would agree, for checks and balances, but imagine if 99% of the community would question, do you think a rabbi or a leader would go ahead and start doing necessary things when he's going to take such abuse? Obviously not. So there must be a balance here, right? You cannot have a ruler that is never questioned. It cannot be part of any healthy system that there is no one checking if the decisions being made are for the right reason. You have to have, right? Believe it or not, we have to have some level of respect for the free media. Obviously, they should follow the guidelines of the Chafetz Chaim, and obviously the New York Times, right, and the Globe and Mail should ask themselves before they publish something, is this Lashon Hara, or perhaps this is necessary, right? But at the same time, it is necessary to get the word out when there's abuse of power, when religious leaders are abusing their power, when there's inappropriate behavior by people that are supposed to inspire us. It is needed. It is needed. But if the result is going to be that they're going to question everything, and as a result, rulers and leaders are going to withdraw, or people that are capable of leadership are going to step away from it, that's not healthy either. So the question I am asking is kavod, right? Honor, which is important. Yes, we do honor people. What is Judaism's view about the proper balance of things? Okay. So, and again, I'm asking this question because I want to eventually get to the understanding of the name of this week's Parsha, Pekudei. That's why I'm asking this question. So the first part of my answer is actually going to be in last week's Haftorah. Last week we read Parashat Shkalim that talks about raising funds for the operating temple. And we read a fascinating Haftorah last Shabbos. The Haftorah shares with us the story of the nation of Israel led by a righteous king. His name was Yehoash. Now, Yoash at some point realizes that there was negligence regarding the structure of the temple. It was not taken care of. They needed, in the word of the prophet, bedek habayit, fixing the house. It was after a period where the ruler was not concerned about the spiritual welfare of the people of Israel. The structure was neglected. You needed to raise funds. So it shares with us an interesting story that originally the king came up with an idea that individual Kohanim are going to receive funds from people they know and fix what's needed. In other words, place the responsibility on all the Kohanim without a centralized authority to guide them how to repair the structure. That's the story. Now, that plan failed. So plan B was that they raised funds, and they got someone to be in charge of the operation. So they had a team that was in charge of getting the funds, spending it on wood, spending it on stones, spending it on workers. Now, the text tells us that you should know, and this is at the end of the Haftorah, when things are operating the way they should. In other words, this is what the prophet wants us to know as a healthy system to have an operating temple, that those in charge of the operations were not questioned on every single decision. In the words of the prophet, Velo yechashvu et anashim, they did not make an accounting with the men who were in charge. Why? Ki be'emunah hemosim, because they were doing it with integrity. Perhaps we talked about this. Now, what the Haftarah wants us to know is that in Jewish law, if you research someone to take charge of a tzedakah operation, of an organization of charity, and you did your research, and it's a trustworthy individual, and it's a person you feel that you could trust, step back, trust them. Don't question every single move. Let them live, give them breathing room. And as long as there are no clear-cut violations, let them operate, and then it will be successful. Okay? So that's what the Haftarah of last week's Parsha tells us. This week's Parsha, Parashat Pekudei, starts off with Moshe Rabbeinu presenting to the nation of Israel every single detail regarding the funds that came in for the temple, the materials that came in for the construction of the tabernacle, and what the funds were used for. These are the reckonings of the tabernacle of testimony, which were reckoned by Moshe. And the authorities derive from it the following, and this is something in halacha, that the healthy structure of an organization is that, yes, the people shouldn't question their leaders on every decision. It wouldn't be healthy. But rather, the leaders have the responsibility of being transparent and honest. So without the pressure of the community, without being pressured, you do your part to be honest, okay? And there's a very significant message there that the Torah wants every ruler to know. You know what? The cynicism of the masses is unacceptable in Jewish law. And the masses are being told, trust your rulers, right? They are people, if they have a good reputation, and you know that in general they're doing it with integrity, let them live. But you do your part. In the words of the rabbis, quoting a verse in the Torah, Veitem nekiim, you should be naki, you should be clean, you should try to do things in a way that are pure in the eyes of the masses. In other words, don't do things that are going to be questioned by the masses. Don't do that. Try to do things in a clean, proper way. This is what the authorities tell us. And it's derived from this week's parsha. Veitem nekiim, you should do it in a very clear, kosher way. Okay? So again, this is halacha. And to quote what the Talmud tells us, Ein mechashvin b'tzdaka im gabei tzedaka. You don't question them on every single move. But at the same time, they have to do their part and be transparent. Okay? So this is a little bit of a balance. But it relates far more than just the finances. You know, there's a verse in Mishlei that says the following: Melech, a king, b'mishpat ya'amid aretz. If there's mishpat, if there's justice, he's going to go ahead and establish and have a secure land. Give authority to the melech that he could go ahead and have justice, and you're going to have a functional land. You know what causes destruction, the verse tells us? Ish trumot. If on the other hand, the ruler has to run around and ask for truma, for example, the Kohen has to run around and ask people for the portion that he deserves. Or perhaps it's also a metaphor if an authority needs to run around and every single decision he makes, present to the people why he is doing it and ask them for their support, yeharsena, that's going to cause a destruction. Okay, and the rabbis say the following, that this applies to judges. In domeh dayan lemelech, the rabbis tell us that if a judge is like a king, like a finer authority, and he doesn't have to go ahead and seek out people who support him, who love him, he's respected and he can make the right decision, and he doesn't have to take into consideration the fact that the strong position he is taking might hurt one of his great supporters. If he has that authority, Ya'amid Aretz, you're going to have an established, safe, secure land. If on the other hand, if he's a person that is seeking out trumot, he's always seeking support, financial support, emotional support, simple approval from the masses, yeharsena. So the main idea is the Jewish people, Judaism believes we need to have a strong authority. No question about it. No question about it. But the authority himself has to have values that keep him in check. And when you have a world ruler, and the ruler has a big desire for kavod, a big desire for honor, and perhaps Vladimir Putin has been satisfied up until recently with the fact that he was the only ruler for life of Russia. But then perhaps he's starting to have more of a vision of how history is going to look at him. And the history of Russia is such that the ones that are studied in the history books were the ones that expanded an empire. And perhaps he views his existence as one that is only valuable if he could add his name to the books of history by expanding Russia, bringing back the great Soviet Union. And especially Ukraine, right? The cradle, the origin of their Russian culture. They view Kiev, they feel this deep attachment to Kiev. The ego, the kavod, right? The kavod that he has, this desire for honor, when it is unchecked, became extremely dangerous. So in general, right, Judaism is not perhaps in favor of a ruler that every single day needs to go to Twitter or needs to go on whatever social media account and explain every single decision. We have to have an understanding that we need to back off and trust rulers. But at the same time, what we are seeing at this point is a very, very destructive approach, because there is no reckoning from the ruler himself. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu is doing what the perfect ruler is doing, a ruler that is following the values of Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu easily could have claimed, I'm Moshe, I'm in charge of this nation. I'm not going to go ahead and publicize every single detail. The people need to learn to trust their rulers and their leaders and not question them. I'm not sharing. I'm not going to be transparent. Forget about opening the books. I'm not going to publicize it. They need to trust. He could have said it. But Moshe Rabbeinu did not. What does Moshe Rabbeinu do in this final parsha? Before we bring the structure of the Beis Hamikdash, of the Mishkan, and the Shekhinah, the presence of the Creator to the world, he says, you know what I'm going to do? There's going to be a reckoning. I'm going to be the ruler who's going to say, you know what? I'm going to lower myself. I'm not going to worry about my kavod, but I'm going to be the one to open the books and share with them every single detail. And this is an important rule. It's an important rule specifically as things are being wrapped up. Now, before we explain that, what that means, things are getting wrapped up. Whenever we as Jews study things of our tradition and focus on the value of Klal Yisrael, there's this delicate balance that we have to have between those things that relate to us and only to us, and at the same time, that which relates to the world. In other words, I have a problem with a system of Torah education that sees no value in humanity beyond the people of Israel. I see a problem with it. I believe, and this is the education I got in yeshiva, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tselem. Every single human being is beloved. They were created in the image of God. And since they were created in the image of God, there's value in every single human being. And when hundreds of people, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people are suffering during this terrible, terrible war that's taking place in Europe, the Torah Jew needs to feel the pain, Something terrible is happening. Okay, so in many ways, we see ourselves part of humanity. At the same time, we focus on things that are specifically tailored for us. We have a unique mission. And we have to keep it balanced. In other words, to be a universal Jew and think that there's nothing special about our tradition, it's going to be damaging for the Jew, and long-term it's damaging for the world, because the Jewish people make a contribution when they understand their roots, when they understand that they have a unique role to fulfill. But to go ahead and completely ignore the world is also not appropriate. There is a statement in the Talmud that if a person ends the second bracha of Birkat HaMazon, instead of Al Haaretz ve'al HaMazon, instead of expressing gratitude for our land, the land of Israel, if they decide that they're going to become universal and say, God, you are great because you are manchil aratzot, because you give all nations their land. So the Talmud tells us that if someone does that, they are considered a boor, an empty person. In other words, Jewish tradition wants you to appreciate what's yours, focus on what's yours, focus on the welfare of your people, focus on trying to educate them about the value of their tradition, right? When you do that, you're having a positive impact on the big picture as well, because Jews in general do good for the world. That's what Judaism teaches. Now, often messages that are very Jewish are extremely relevant for the whole world. In other words, when we talk about the danger, kina, tava, kavod, the danger of these desires, these are messages that the whole world could benefit from. Because if you could go ahead and turn to anyone that is struggling with any one of these and give them a lecture in Pirkei Avot and explain to them your jealousy is something that needs to be addressed. Don't give into it, right? Don't think that you're going to find a solution to your jealousy, that your neighbor has a better car, because if all you do is get a car like his, you're going to be in the next day jealous of the yacht of your neighbor. You're not going to find a solution by giving in. The only solution to kina is by remembering and being mindful of what existence is about. That is so Jewish, but you can make a contribution to humanity if they become aware of it. Do you not think that Vladimir Putin would not benefit from a good lecture on Pirkei Avos? Right? Would he not benefit if we would go ahead, someone would teach him, kavod, you have honor, you have what you need, right? Don't worry about your legacy. If you focus on providing your people with good roads and good healthcare system, and perhaps take away a little bit of money from your buddies and give it more to the people who need it desperately, and upgrade your hospitals and your roads, that is something that's valuable. Then you'll get kavod. If you would learn Pirkei Avos, the world would be a much better place, right? If we can have it, in other words, if that could be the goal, that when religious people have a connection to a person in power, These should be those should be the messages that we study. Kina taive kavod, right? Wouldn't Prince, I think it's Andrew, would benefit a lot from learning Pirkei Avos, right? When Sir Jonathan Sachs, Olav Shalom, was learning with Charles, wouldn't it be nice if he would bring his brother with him to learn a little bit about desires and giving into them and how destructive it is? So now, with that in mind, that Jewish messages could relate to the world, what we have to realize is that when we talk about a Mishkan and a Mikdash, when we talk about a tabernacle and a temple, it is a structure that is there for the sake of humanity. It is a structure, right? Beti bet tfilah yikareh lechol ha'amim. All nations can be inspired. And obviously, nations should not just be inspired by the fact that they can come and talk to God there, which is good. Nations should be inspired that they could come to Jerusalem and listen to God. Hear the values of Judaism. Kina taiva kavod should be issues that humanity should hear. Okay? So, Pekudei, which is a word that is basically telling us Moshe Rabbeinu is a humble leader. He's a leader who is willing to say, okay, the people want more information about what the funds were used for. I'm going to give reckoning. This is a message that really finalizes the tabernacle, which eventually turns into a temple, which humanity needs to hear and world leaders need to hear. That if you want to go ahead and have an impact on the world, if you want to do good, you need to know that message. Don't think that the masses just need to accept you the way it is. Yes, Judaism gives you authority, but you do your part. You do your part in the reckoning. You know, the Talmud notes that the 7 days leading to the inauguration of the Mishkan of the Tabernacle were unique days because Moshe Rabbeinu served as a priest. These were unique days. Now, these 7 days, which took place on the last 7 days of the month of Adar, those 7 days, the Shivas Yemei HaMiluim, the Talmud notes that Moshe Rabbeinu actually had a unique garment, What was unique about the garment of Moshe Rabbeinu? So the Talmud tells us that it had no hem. It had no hem. What's the significance of having no hem? So this is what the authorities struggle with. Okay, it was Moshe Rabbeinu's garment as he served for 7 days, the last days of the month of Adar, and it had no hem. Chaluk Lavan, it was a white robe without a hem. What's the significance? So authorities say the following. There's another Mishnah that tells us that when the Kohen would make his way into the chamber that had money, funds, for the purchasing of korbanot, when the Kohen would go into that chamber, he was careful not to have with him his tefillin and not to have cuffs or hems in his garment, meaning he should be wearing a garment that cannot conceal any money. This is what we are told. Why? Well, the concern is that if he comes out and rumors start circulating that he took some money, and especially if his financial situation changes, if suddenly he purchases a new cow, there are going to be rumors circulating that, you know why he has a new cow? He used communal money. Or if he starts becoming poor, they're going to think it's a punishment from God for taking money. So therefore, to play it safe, he never wore a garment that could conceal any money. Moshe Rabbeinu followed the same practice for the 7 days of the building of the tabernacle, which was a time that there were lots of funds circulating. He wanted to wear a garment that there should be no questions. No questions asked at all. And some authorities see the last 7 days of the year as symbolically to the last days of time. In other words, in Judaism, in general, when we talk about a messianic era, we take a positive approach to it, a time that there's blessing in the land of Israel, and a time that the nation of Israel is fulfilling what they should be doing, inspiring the world. We, in general, take a very positive attitude towards the messianic era. But perhaps what we're being told is that throughout history, if rulers perhaps were a little bit lax with their transparency, in the messianic era, there should be an expectation they should be more careful. You can't hide things anymore. There was a circulating in the news not long ago about misbehavior of a specific world leader. I'm not going to mention names because it's a Jewish one. But what I would thought to myself is that such behavior decades ago, no one would talk about, right? No one would address at all. In other words, that Shimon Peres did some inappropriate things in Paris in 1980, attempting to do something inappropriate. The world covered up. Rulers felt they could do what they want. That era is over, it appears. It's over, right? Rulers no longer can rely on the fact that the media is going to turn a blind eye and society is not going to accept it. And as a result, this is an era, if we view these last 7 days of the year as symbolically to a time when the world is reaching perhaps, and we pray, to that messianic era, it places this additional responsibility on rulers to go ahead and make every decision in a proper way, because you can't hide anymore. Someone's going to be filming you, right? You have stories of people that overall are very wonderful people and make a mistake, but then it's filmed. You have to realize we're in an era of transparency. And there's an expectation that rulers, leaders are mindful of it. So perhaps that's what's symbolized. But the most important thing, and the message that really answers the question, why is it Pekudei? Why is the construction of the tabernacle and the construction of the temple and the purpose of humanity the word Pekudei? It is a word that says you're a ruler. Yes, we're going to respect you, but understand, you have a responsibility of respecting the masses. And don't let your ego go out of control, because when a ruler has to be mindful of what the masses are saying and needs to be in tune with them, right? If Vladimir Putin would be in tune with the needs of the Russian people, if he would be concerned about the people who suddenly, can function, can't purchase furniture, can't purchase food, the ruble is becoming worthless. If it was a ruler that would tune into the concept of Pekudei, that Moshe Rabbeinu turns to the people of Israel and says, you know what, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to show you that I didn't take anything for myself. And you said to yourself, Rabbi Shalom, does Moshe Rabbeinu have to do that? The answer is he doesn't. But he did it because he understood that is how we create a structure that is a light upon the nations, because the nations need to know this. Rulers need to know it. Because the ruler, not Moshe, but other rulers, if they're not questioned, and if their decisions are basically what's good for them and not for others, that's when you have destruction. In general, we're often told that the attitude towards rabbis is very different in Hasidic circles than in Lithuanian circles. Like in general, we're told that in the Lithuanian world, you question more your rabbis. In the Hasidic world, you don't question your rabbis. So there's a cute story I read recently about the Munkach Rebbe, the Minchas Eluzar, who for many years couldn't have children, and eventually in his second marriage had a daughter. And the daughter was the only child, and the Rebbe, and this is back in Munkach, the Rebbe on the Seder night would have all the Hasidim there in the Tish. And obviously the women were in a separate room. That was their practice. But he would bring in his daughter, even as a young teenager, to ask the Manishtana, to ask the 4 questions. And the Hasidim got a little bit uncomfortable. A young lady coming, there are young boys here. This is not appropriate. And the Rebbe said, listen, perhaps this is unconventional, but you people need me, the Rebbe here. I need to be with my daughter. I can't have a Seder without my daughter asking the questions. So since I'm not going to be here without my daughter and you need me, we have no other choice. This is what the Rebbe said. So what was interesting to me was that even the Hasidic world, they questioned their Rebbe. Obviously, they got a good, sharp answer. And it indicates that, emotions are greater than all rules and regulations that one might have in theory. Often people have in theory all kind of ideals until it relates to them and their emotion. But questioning should be respected when done appropriately. In other words, Judaism has that answer. Let's respect our authorities, but at the same time, let's tell our authorities, you do your part. Learn Parashat Pekudei. And hopefully this is a message that the world could learn. And hopefully, perhaps we're going to merit, it's a time to pray that something happens in the head of the leader of Russia. Who knows? Perhaps some Israeli or some rabbi could work out some kind of compromise. I don't know. I don't know what to say. I think there's some level of absurdity when you read the news that Zelensky has a little bit of a complaint on Israel, on Bennett, for not taking a stronger position against Russia. And I asked myself, I didn't hear Zelensky taking any major strong positions against Iran. So I think he could keep quiet regarding this matter. But in general, it's a time for tefillah. It's a time to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he should have mercy. It's a terrifying, in some ways, it's quite terrifying. But we as Torah Jews believe that there's a higher being, and we have to believe that this is something that somehow should bring forth the good, and who knows, maybe we can merit some wonderful redemption as a result. For now, let's take care of ourselves. It should be a wonderful and meaningful Shabbos and a good Chodesh, and Mishenichnas Adar Marbe Mesimcha. We are in the first moments of the happiness of Adar, and indeed may we merit complete happiness with good news and a redemption. Thank you all.